Eleanor never imagined her life would change so drastically at 74 after her divorce 10 years ago. She settled into a quiet existence in her sprawling Victorian home on the outskirts of town. The house, though beautiful, carried the weight of memories, and its creaks and groans reminded her that nothing stayed. Young forever, not homes, not hearts. Despite its size, the house felt like a companion. She loved the mornings filled with light streaming through stained glass windows, and the evenings where she would sip tea on the balcony, imagining what might have been. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video, because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. She lived alone, though she had long ago made with solitude. Her children lived in different states, caught up in their own lives, and she rarely saw them. Outside of the holidays, her days were routine, marked by garden walks, afternoons devoted to reading, and occasional market excursions. However, one summer morning, while she prepared toast in the kitchen, the lights flickered, and the refrigerator's hum ceased abruptly. She exhaled audibly. Another electrical issue. That's how she met Daniel. Daniel didn't resemble the electrician she was familiar with when he arrived at her door. He was young, perhaps 30, with sharp green eyes and a warm, simple smile. His uniform fit him well, and his hands carried the kind of roughness that spoke of honest hard work. "You must be Mrs. Bennet," he said, tipping his cap. "I'm Daniel. You called about some electrical issues." Eleanor nodded, feeling oddly self-conscious. "Yes, the power's been acting up for a few days, and this morning it just stopped completely." Daniel stepped inside his boots, making soft thuds against the polished wood floor. "Let me take a look." He labored silently. As Eleanor traversed between the kitchen and the basement breaker box, she found herself observing him more than she intended, noting the furrow of his brow during moments of concentration and the precision of his hand movements. It had been years since she had shared her home with another, and his presence filled the void in an unexpected manner. "How long have you lived here?" Daniel inquired while attending to various tasks around the house. His tone was gentle, devoid of judgment, as she confessed that the residents had seen better days. "This house has character," he remarked with a smile, examining the wiring beneath the sink. "They don't construct them like this anymore." Eleanor responded with politeness. With a chuckle, Daniel remarked that it was old and obstinate, much like its owner. His laughter was warm and sincere. Age does not equate to obsolescence. Sometimes, the finest things merely require additional attention. The words lingered in the air, causing Eleanor to feel a flush rise to her cheeks, which she reassured herself was merely a benign comment. By the time he concluded, the sun was setting, enveloping the kitchen in a golden glow. "I addressed the immediate issue, but the wiring in this house is antiquated," Daniel explained while packing his tools. "It could benefit from a complete overhaul." Eleanor hesitated, contemplating the expense of such work. The cost would be substantial. However, she recognized its necessity. What would be the duration? 1 week. "I may require additional verification. I must review all details." He proposed to commence tomorrow, room by room. Despite the absence of any rationale for hesitation, Eleanor found herself acquiescing much too readily, expressing her gratitude. "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Daniel." The following morning, Daniel returned, initiating a routine that became oddly reassuring each day as he arrived with his toolbox and a kind smile, infusing the house with a presence it had lacked. He worked assiduously. Eleanor frequently engaged in conversation with him during his breaks, discovering that he had grown up in a nearby small town. He had originally aspired to be an architect, but ultimately assumed control of his father's electrical enterprise. He was courteous, considerate, and exuded a magnetic optimism. "You are unlike most individuals I encounter," he remarked one afternoon while they sat on the porch sipping lemonade. Daniel's inquiry surprised Eleanor, revealing her indifference to others' opinions and highlighting her authenticity, a revelation she found invigorating. His gaze made her feel acknowledged in a manner she hadn't experienced in years. As time progressed, Eleanor increasingly anticipated Daniel's visits, more than she was willing to confess. Their interactions were characterized by natural ease and unspoken comprehension, yet there was an additional, unarticulated element present. Something unarticulated yet irrefutable transpired one evening as Daniel concluded his day. A violent summer tempest ensued, with rain cascading in torrents and thunder reverberating in the distance. "You should remain until it subsides." Eleanor observed the tempest from the window as Daniel nodded, placing his tools aside. "It appears I have little choice," he remarked. They occupied the living room, the sound of rain permeating the silence. Eleanor offered him a cup of tea, and their hands briefly brushed, igniting an undeniable spark within her. "Thank you," Daniel replied, his tone unusually gentle. Their gazes locked, and for an instant, the storm outside seemed to dissipate. Eleanor wished she could fully comprehend the dynamics unfolding between them, yet the reality was that she did not. She merely recognized that Daniel's presence had rekindled a dormant sense of possibility and connection within her. But this realization came with trepidation. He was young, and she was not. Society would perceive their relationship as absurd and inappropriate. Nevertheless, when he smiled at her, the weight of those judgments felt inconsequential, while the storm continued to rage on. Outside, the temperature was cool, yet the room felt warm, almost suffocating, as Daniel and Eleanor sat in the dim illumination of the table lamp. His presence was stabilizing, yet it ignited an electric sensation within her. For the first time in years, she felt invigorated. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands positioned accordingly. "Ling, the teacup," he continued, his voice low and contemplative. "I do not believe I have ever been in a residence that felt so much like a home." Eleanor bent her head, observing him. What leads you to assert that he emitted a gentle chuckle while surveying the meticulously selected furnishings? The deteriorating wallpaper, the array of books on the shelves? I think it's you, not the house, that gives it a soul through your care and the stories you've told here. His remarks enveloped Eleanor in a warmth she found difficult to articulate. "You are attributing to me excessive merit." She smiled to mask her newfound weakness. "I don't think Daniel said, holding her eyes. His eyes exhibited a subdued intensity. The silence between them was laden with unexpressed sentiments, causing her heart to race. Eleanor ought to have diverted her gaze, yet she found herself leaning slightly forward, as if drawn by an invisible force, while the rain persisted in its relentless downpour outside. A steady rhythm synchronized with the pounding of her heart. Daniel's hand hesitated momentarily before brushing against hers. The touch was light and tentative, yet it sent a jolt through her. I heard his voice barely above a whisper, but whatever he intended to say was lost as Eleanor closed the distance between them. It was not a decision, but rather an instinct, a leap into the unknown. Their lips met softly and tentatively at first, but the kiss quickly deepened, fueled by a longing Eleanor had not realized existed. Daniel's hand moved to her cheek, cupping it gently as if fearing she might withdraw, but she did not. When they eventually separated, breathless and wide-eyed, Eleanor scrutinized his face for any indication of reluctance or remorse, but all she perceived was his raw, open, and utterly unguarded expression. "I'm sorry," Eleanor uttered, though she was uncertain about the reason for her apology. "Do not be," Daniel responded, his tone resolute. "However, kindly note that something changed that night. The kiss was not merely a fleeting moment, but a pivotal juncture, a subtle recognition of the underlying tension that had developed between them. However, it also brought forth uncertainties and apprehensions, Eleanor." Eleanor was unprepared to confront the forthcoming day. Daniel arrived as per usual, yet there was a nuanced alteration in his gaze towards her, a slight prolongation of his presence in the doorway, and a fleeting touch of his hand against hers as he passed her a tool. Eleanor found herself observing him anew, but this time, the attraction she felt towards him was undeniable, despite her aversion today. Daniel said, catching her gaze with a teasing smile. Eleanor replied. Trying to sound nonchalant, he straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you're spying on me," Eleanor laughed, but the sound was nervous. "Maybe I just like the company." Daniel's smile softened, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. It was as if everything the years Eleanor had spent alone, the aching quiet of this house, the fears she had never voiced, flagged into the background. This young man, so vibrant and full of life, stood before her with a mixture of tenderness and hesitation. Daniel's last day in Eleanor's home felt more significant than she could admit aloud. "I guess this is it," he said, his voice barely audible. There was a heaviness in his tone that made Eleanor's chest tighten. She tried to steady herself to sound calm, but her words wavered. "Yes, it seems so," replied Daniel, shifting his hands and fidgeting slightly before he tucked them into his pockets. "It's strange, isn't it, how quickly time passes? It feels like just yesterday I was fixing your circuit." Breaker. For the first time, Eleanor smiled, the memory fresh in her mind. She remembered how awkward and shy he had been that first day, so professional and polite. Over time, his walls had come down, and they had found an easy rhythm sharing, stories and laughter during his breaks. Now that rhythm was about to end, and the thought left her hollow. "I'm going to miss our chats," Eleanor admitted softly. "You've brought so much life into this. House Daniel, it hasn't felt this warm in years." Daniel looked at her, then his gaze steady and searching as though he were trying to memorize every line of her face. "You've been amazing, Eleanor. More than I could have ever expected." There was a pause, a moment of stillness where the air between them seemed to thrum with unspoken words. Before she could think better of it, Eleanor reached out and touched his hand. His skin was warm under hers, and he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers closed around hers, firm yet gentle. The words tumbled out of her before she could stop them. "I don't want this to be goodbye." Daniel's breath caught, and for a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then with a sudden urgency, he stepped closer. Eleanor murmured, his voice low and intimate. "I don't want it to be either." His hand came up to her chest, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly when she opened them again. His face was so close to hers that she could feel his breath against her skin. The world seemed to tilt as he closed the distance between them. His lips brushed against hers, in a kiss that was as tender as it was, electrifying. It was the kind of kiss that made time stand still and made her forget everything, but the way his mouth moved against hers, and the way his hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer for the first time in years, she felt alive, truly alive, and it was intoxicating. Acting when they finally pulled apart, Eleanor was breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel began, but he shook his head, his eyes shining with something she couldn't quite name. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Let's just enjoy this moment." And so they did. The day stretched on, each moment tinged with a bittersweetness that neither of them acknowledged aloud as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Daniel offered to stay for tea, and Eleanor eagerly agreed. While she prepared the tea in the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope blooming within her. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe there was a way for them to continue seeing each other, to explore whatever this was between them. She set the tray with care, arranging the cups and biscuits just so, when she carried it back to the living room, a soft smile on her lips, she found the space empty. Daniel called out, placing the tray on the table. Her voice echoed in the quiet house, panic prickling at the edges of her mind as she searched each room. When she reached the guest bedroom where he had been working earlier, her heart sank. Her jewelry box lay open on the dresser, its contents gone. Her grandmother's antique watch was missing, along with a few other valuable items. She stood frozen, her mind racing. It didn't make sense. Daniel, wouldn't he couldn't, but the evidence was undeniable. She tried calling him, her hands trembling as she dialed his number, but each attempt went straight to voicemail over and over. Heart broke a little more with each unanswered ring. That night she sat alone in her house, staring at the empty spaces where her treasured belongings had been. But it wasn't the stolen items that hurt the most. It was the betrayal. The realization that she had let her guard down had opened her heart only to have it shattered for weeks. Eleanor replayed everything in her mind, searching for clues for signs that she had missed. She couldn't understand how someone who had seemed so genuine and so kind could do something so cruel months later. As she was cleaning out a drawer in the living room, she found an envelope tucked away beneath a stack of old magazines. Her name was scrolled on the front in Daniel's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it, unfolding the letter inside Eleanor. The letter began, "I know you. Probably hate me right now, and you have every right to what I did was unforgivable. I took advantage of your kindness and your trust, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that what we shared, those moments we had together, were real. You made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, something I didn't think I was capable of feeling. And that scared me. I'm not a good man, Eleanor. I've made mistakes, and I'll probably make more, but meeting you changed me, even if I wasn't brave enough to show it. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Someday, tears blurred Eleanor's vision. As she read his words, they didn't erase what he had done. They didn't bring back the items he had stolen or the trust he had broken, but they gave her a small sense of closure, a sliver of understanding. She reread the letter several times, each word a bittersweet reminder of the man she had led into her life and her heart. His actions had caused her pain, but his words hinted at a struggle within him, a war between the person he wanted to be and the person he felt he had to be. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. Placing it back into the envelope, she sat there in silence. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt colder and emptier. But as the hours passed, P realized that she wasn't angry anymore. Not at him, not at herself. She had loved and trusted, and while that trust had been broken, it didn't diminish. the bravery it took to open her heart in the first place. The next morning, she began to reclaim her life. She reported the theft to the authorities, not with the hope of retrieving the stolen items, but as a step toward moving forward. She also reached out to her bank to ensure her financial security. Daniel might have taken some tangible pieces of her life, but she wouldn't let him take her. Peace of mind. Over the following weeks, Eleanor filled the empty spaces in her home with new memories. She redecorated, planting vibrant flowers in the garden and hanging new artwork on the walls. Each small change was a declaration that her life would go on. But there were moments when she missed him. She missed the way he had looked at her, like she was the most important person in the world. She missed the simple conversations and the shared laughter. And yes, she missed the way he had made her feel beautiful and wanted to be alive. One evening, she sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. The words poured out before she even realized what she was writing. "You hurt me more than I thought possible, but you also reminded me of something I had, long forgotten. The power of love, even when it's imperfect. You gave me back a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. I don't know where you are or if you'll ever read this, but I want you to know that despite everything, I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to move on without bitterness in my heart. Thank you for the good and the bad, for the joy and the lessons I hope you find your way, just as I'm finding mine." Eleanor folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She didn't intend to send it, but writing it gave her a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed months later on a rainy afternoon. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a woman standing there. "Are you Eleanor holding a small box?" woman asked, her voice soft but firm. Eleanor nodded, curiosity tinged with apprehension. "This is for you," the woman said, handing her the box. "Daniel asked me to deliver it." Before Eleanor could respond, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain inside the box. Eleanor found her grandmother's antique watch, along with a few of the other items Daniel had taken beneath them, and a note written in his familiar handwriting. "Eleanor, I'm sorry it took me so long to do the right thing. I can't undo the hurt I caused, but I hope this can be a start. Thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it." Daniel's return of her belongings brought a sense of finality. It was as if a chapter of her life had closed not with a slam, but with a gentle, resolute click. Eleanor didn't hear from Daniel again. After that, and she didn't expect to, but the return of the stolen items spoke volumes about his journey, and it gave her a strange sense of peace. In the end, she chose to remember Daniel not for the betrayal, but for the light he had brought into her life. However briefly he had taught her that love, even when flawed, could still be transformative. As the years went on, Eleanor carried those lessons with her, embracing life with a renewed sense of hope and courage. And though Daniel remained a bittersweet memory, she was grateful for the way he had changed her for the better. The house once filled with silence and solitude now echoed with laughter and warmth again, not because of him, but because of the strength he had helped her rediscover within herself. And for that she would always be thankful.